Hello, and welcome to the Myths That Shape. We look forward to spending the next 90 minutes with you, enjoying performances from our storytellers from around the world and appreciating the continuing relevance of traditional tales. You will see that there's a chat room feature open tonight. That is because we'd like to hear from you. As each performer finishes their story, we would love it if you could share what lesson or lessons you have learned from the story in the chat room. We'd also really appreciate it, just so we can see the chat room feature right now, if you can share where you're attending this event from in the world. Oftentimes, we think of traditional stories, myths, and fables as being for children, but many traditional tales deal with adult concerns and situations. We will be hearing about some of the benefits of these stories throughout the course of the evening from our wonderful storytellers. And with that in mind, I'd like to introduce our first guest, Awe. Awe is a storyteller, performer, and theatre scholar with a rich background in drama and cultural performance. Originally from Zimbabwe in South Africa, she has lived, studied, and worked across the UK, Southeast Asia, and now Spain. Her work explores identity, belonging, and oral traditions, particularly in South African storytelling and poetry. With an MA from Rhodes University and a PhD in theatre studies from Warwick University, she has taught drama at universities and international schools, while also creating original performances. She continues to research and experiment with traditional performance styles, bringing African oral literature to life. Awe, thank you for joining us this evening.
Sorry, thank you for having me. Thank you very much for the invitation.
It's very good. Awe, you specialise in retelling traditional African stories. What is it about the myths and folktales of Africa that you still think have value for a modern audience?
Thank you very much for that question. For me, I think it is the fact that a lot of these myths and folktales, they allow us to escape our immediate reality. A lot of work has been done on, the benefits of narrative for human beings. Human beings are narrative creatures. We love to use our imaginations. We love to come out of our immediate reality and put ourselves into different worlds, different spaces, different experiences. And I love African folktales because traditionally there were ways in which people could unwind it. Creating a sense of enjoyment and community and belonging. And I think
we may have lost our way there. What we'll say for now is, just while we see what's happening there, if you can just message into the comments, just really what storytelling means to you, why you think storytelling is so important right now, and we can read some of them and then get back to Awe when she's here now. Awe, we've got you back.
There's a storm currently. I'm in the south of Spain. There's a storm and something just went. So I'm very sorry.
That was a brilliant answer. What I'll say now is, if you would mind reading the story you've prepared for us.
Okay. I hope that the internet stays connected this time, but I will do my best. Okay. The story I'm going to tell today is a story about the lion and the rabbit, and it's a story originally from Zimbabwe. So get comfortable, and I hope you enjoy. Once upon a time, kare, long, long ago, when fish could walk, animals could talk, and the world was ruled by magic and mystery. Everyone knew that the lion was the king of the jungle, but there was one other animal known for his clever wit. Now, one day, The lion was walking through the countryside when suddenly something small dashed out of the bushes in front of him. Without thinking, the lion pounced. When he lifted his paw, there, underneath, was a rabbit, flat. "Oh," said the lion, "it's a pity to waste a good rabbit." And so he ate him up. Now, when the rabbit's cousin got to hear about this, he was furious. "Something has to be done. This is serious. The lion might get a taste for rabbits, and then he will eat us all." Now, the little rabbit's cousin was sitting outside of his hut under a tree and eating some honey that he had collected from a place up in the hills, when he looked up and there, across the yard in front of him, was the lion. Oh, Rabbit didn't know what to do. Should he run away, or should he stay here and be very still? But it was too late. The lion had already seen him. "Good morning, Rabbit." "Oh, good morning, Mr. Lion." And what have you got there, Rabbit?" Oh, just some honey I collected from the hills." "I'd like to taste some of your honey, Rabbit." "Oh, of course, certainly, Mr. Lion. Here, have all of it." "Just a taste, Rabbit, just a taste." And so the lion dipped his paw. A very good honey, Rabbit. A very good. Where did you get it?" In the hills, Mr. Lion." "I think I would like to collect some honey myself, Rabbit. Would you show me the way?" "Certainly, Mr. Lion, certainly." "Well, you lead the way." No, Mr. Lion, you lead the way. After all, you are the king of eaten up in one bite." And so off they went together, with the lion walking ahead and the rabbit directing the lion about where to go. "Left here, Mr. Lion. Right here, Mr. Lion. Oh, watch out for that rock, Mr. Lion. Oh, this is a low tree, Mr. Lion." And on they went, until, after some time climbing towards the hills, they reached the foot of a very steep hill. "This is the place, Mr. Lion, where I got the honey." Now, the rabbit had an idea. But, oh dear." "What is it, Rabbit?" Oh, Mr. Lion, this hill is far too steep for you to climb. Why don't you stay down here, have a rest, relax, and I will run up to the top of the hill and fetch the honey and throw it down to you." "That sounds like a very good idea, Rabbit. I am very tired. I would like to relax." "Yes, certainly, Mr. Lion. But there's just one problem. Yes, Rabbit? Well, when I get to the top, how will I know that you are in exactly the right place so that I can throw the honey down to you? They both thought. I know, Mr. Lion. What if I nail you in place? Your left foot, your right foot, your left arm, your right arm, and your tail. If I nail you in place, then I will know that you are in exactly the right position. And all you have to do is lie there with joy. The lion thought, that sounds like a very good idea.
Whilst we whilst we just listen to the end of Owe's story, can anyone come? Oh, there, she's back now.
I apologize. Where
okay.
did I leave?
We lost you at start from about 30 seconds ago.
Okay. Well, and so the lion allowed the rabbit to nail him into place. One by one, the pegs went in. Left foot, the right foot, the left arm, the right arm, and the tail. Aha, said the little rabbit. It looks like we're all set. Now, you stay down here and I will run up the hill and get the honey. And so the little rabbit ran up the hill and the lion remained at the bottom with his mouth wide open, and he was dreaming of all the lovely, sweet, delicious honey that would fill up his belly. Now, when the rabbit got to the top of the hill, he did not go to the place where the honey was, but instead he went looking for a boulder. When he found just the right boulder and he pushed it into the perfect place at the very edge of the hill, he shouted down to the lion, "Lion, lion, are you ready?" "Yes, rabbit, I'm ready." "Is your mouth wide open?" "Yes, rabbit, my mouth is open." "Are your eyes shut, lion?" "Yes, rabbit, my eyes are shut." "Okay, here comes the honey." And do you know what he did? He leant his little shoulder against the boulder and pushed down the hill, and over the edge it went. And the lion was squashed flat. "Yay, yay, hooray, hooray, I got the lion who killed my cousin. I got the lion who killed my cousin." The little rabbit was so excited, he ran straight down the hill, and he took his little pocket knife out of his belt and, with one swoop, scooped the lion up right out of his skin, and rolled up the lion's skin, put it on his head, and went marching home. "I got the lion who killed my cousin. I got the lion who killed my cousin." When he got home, the little rabbit rolled out the lion skin on the floor. And after that, all the rabbit's friends who came over to see him admired the lovely lion skin rug that he had in his living room. And that is where the story ended.
Thank you so much for that, Awe. That was a brilliant story. If you wouldn't mind sharing into the chat, we'd love to hear what lessons you took away from that brilliant story. And also, while we're waiting for their responses, I'm waiting for a few, I would love to ask you, you seem to have spent your life living in many different parts of the world. How was the experience of living in so many different cultures shaped you as a storyteller?
Thank you for that question. I must apologize again for the internet connection. The weather has been playing havoc, but I'm glad we made it through. Lovely question. I think the experience of living in different places and traveling has certainly enriched my, I suppose it's given me a larger repertoire of ways in which to connect with stories, ways in which to connect with audiences. I think we live in a world where there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of sharing of cultural ideas and images, and being able to go around and live in different places and see how different cultures communicate, see what their kind of, just methods, gestures, for instance, things like, songs, different types of narratives. I think all of that enriches what I do. And I think it's a real privilege to be able to kind of try to use that experience to help me take stories that some of which I grew up with, and some stories that I think could potentially be lost, for us as storytellers to be able to keep those alive and to share them with more people. And experiencing different cultures certainly, I think, helps to be able to do that.
Okay, yeah, that's a brilliant response to that question. Thank you very much. It appears that you must have told the story so well that we have no lessons at the moment. But if anyone does, if anyone does have any,
could I share a lesson that I think is an interesting lesson from this story, which I think appears to be a bit of a sort of light-hearted story, and it is a light-hearted story. But I think there is still a lesson in it, in the sense that the lesson that I drew out of it was a lesson about being aware of your surroundings, firstly, because the lion killed the first rabbit completely by accident. Lion did with the rabbit.
cool. So yeah, we will thank Awe for that. Some of the lessons that guys have been saying. So someone has said that being clever and overcoming difficulties was a great thing. I think I really took that from Awe's story, definitely. Yeah, Anita, David and Goliath's tale. That's a really, really good thing I saw as well. That the rabbit's overcome the lion, which usually wouldn't happen. But yeah, thank you so much for that, Awe. What we'll do now is we will move on to our next storyteller. So we'll move on to David. So David has been a storyteller for over 50 years. He specialized in ancient epics, yet also shares stories from many cultures and historical eras. He has used his storytelling as a secondary and higher education teacher, as well as in his work at hospitals and providing hospice care. David is known nationally and internationally within the storytelling community, and we are very pleased to have him here tonight. Thank you, David, for joining.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
It's glad to have you with us. David, in our preparations for the event, you shared that you felt that traditional stories speak to our collective unconsciousness. Could you explain your thoughts on that for us?
Well, if you look at we'll listen to the story I'm going to tell. This is very much a male archetype. You've got the four male archetypes of king, warrior, magician, and lover. This is the story I'm going to tell has a lot about the warrior and the king, and it speaks a lot to people's can I do this? Can I get over what's happening? So the collective unconscious, if you look at in Jungian archetypes, this is where it comes from. You've got the god, the goddess, you've got the magician, the priestess, all these different types of archetypes. And that's what I mean by the collective unconscious. It's found in stories all around the world. You just have to know where to look.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you so much for that. That was something I really took interest from our preparation of this event. And I think without further ado, if you don't mind performing the story you've got ready for us today.
I'm ready. I have a little introduction to it, so I have to explain two terms, two words that I use, but I'm ready whenever you are.
Yeah, if you go ahead. We're really eager to hear it.
Okay. Hi there, everyone. David Thompson from Elgin, Texas, in the United States. The story I'm going to share with you is from the Ulaid cycle of Northern Ireland, of the great Cuchulainn, the Hound of Ulster, and his archenemy, Queen Maeve, the great warrior queen of Connacht. There are two terms in here which I will explain. One is what is a geis or a geisa. That is a taboo, meaning you can't do something or you have to do something. And the other one is a gabolga, and a gabolga is a warrior's spear. It has three barbed blades to it, and it's meant to disembowel and not just go straight through. So bear in mind that we're going way, way back. So come with me to a time before the division, time before now, to a time of great warrior kings and warrior queens. Tagohonlak nagalak ageri spe sagrihan anomar atamu tawe tamabehoge drandan sunshine dweller don hagui barra nagalcha gui barra naran. Cuchulainn, the Hound of Ulster, had an enemy, the great Queen Maeve, warrior queen of Connacht, she whom he had defeated at the great battle raid of Cooley, she who on bended knee had to sue for safe passage for her and her warriors back to her castle in Connacht. Cuchulainn looked down upon her and says, "Go, bother us no more." And so she and her retinue slinked back to lick their wounds and plan revenge. Queen Maeve, the great warrior queen, called all of her suitors, all of her ministers, and all of her army together, and she spoke. "Who killed your father?" And she pointed to Urk of Leicester. "Cuchulainn." "Who killed your father?" And she pointed to Louis Corra. "Cuchulainn." And she pointed and she raised her hands and she spoke to the entire assemblage. "Who killed their fathers?" And the roar was deafening. "Cuchulainn, Cuchulainn, Cuchulainn." And she smiled and said, we go now." King Conover had a problem. He had heard that Queen Maeve's armies and troops were invading his area. He saw them coming from people who were telling him about they're across the border of Ulster. They're burning, they're killing the men, they're destroying the crops, they're taking the women and the children. We must do something. But as I said, King Conover had a problem. For his warriors were the warriors of the Red Branch, they who in the past had captured a pregnant fairy maid and made her run a race with their fastest horses. She won, and she stood on top of the hill of Macha, and she gave birth there. And she pointed to everyone with earshot, saying, "Whenever Ulster is threatened, you will all fall on the ground in the pangs of birth labor." and she disappeared. And there it was. Conover had a problem. His knights were on the ground, moaning, and they could not move. All except Cuchulainn, the Hound of Ulster, for he had not been there when the curse had been pronounced. Cuchulainn was kept down in the lower areas of the castle, and he was being soothed by bards and musicians. He was being nursed by the great wise women. But little did they know that Queen Maeve of Connacht had sent the 3 one-eyed nag-hag daughters of her great champion Catelyn beyond to learn the dark arts. And so it was. These 3 one-eyed nag-hag women invaded his dreams. And in his dreams, he saw Ulster being invaded. In his dreams, he heard the screams of the people as they were being massacred. And in his dreams, one of the hags appeared as his lover, his wife, and begged him, go, protect us, protect us. Protect us. And it was then that the battle glory came upon him. His hair frizzed out, his eyes bulged, his muscles grew, and you could tell that the battle fury was upon him, the divine battle fury of the Avenger. And he stood up and pushed away everyone around him. He stood up and said, bring me my horse, the Grey of Macha. The queen and king have been told to do so. So King Conover went to the stables and brought out the Grey of Macha, the great king of horses, but he could do nothing. He could do nothing. The horse was incredibly anxious to move. But Cuchulainn, the Hound of Ulster, walked up, grabbed the bridle of the Grey of Macha, who immediately calmed. For the Grey of Macha knew that he was with his master. But if you looked closely into the Grey of Macha's eyes, you could see blood tears streaming down his muzzle, the first sign. Bring me Louis, the great king of charioteers, and we shall go, and we shall meet Maeve at the battlefield. So they strapped the Grey of Macha to the chariot. Cuchulainn and Louis got into the chariot. And off they went. And then they stopped in front of the home of Cuchulainn. And there his mother greeted him with a cup of wine, a cup of mead. But when Cuchulainn looked at it, it was blood. And his mother offered the cup to him and said, I shall not see you again. You must drink this. And he did. The second omen. He kissed his mother goodbye, got back in the chariot. The great crows of the battle goddess, the Morrigan, flew before them. And they stopped. For there, on the side, in a stream, was a wizened old woman washing bloody clothes and moaning and pointing at him as she washed the bloody clothes. And Cuchulainn knew it was a banshee, she who predicts death. The crows of the Morrigan, the battle goddess, went before them, and they stopped. For there in the middle of the road were 3 one-eyed nag-hag ladies cooking a dog for their supper. They looked up at him and said, oh, Cuchulainn, come and join us for a meal. Now, Cuchulainn had 2 geasa placed upon him. 1, he should never taste the flesh of dog, and 2, he must never, ever not answer to an invitation to food. He got out of the chariot. He walked forward, and taking the thumb and the index of his left hand, he reached, pitched a bit, and immediately lost all the strength in his left arm. And where his arm hit his leg, he lost the strength in that leg. The 3 one-eyed knack-hack daughters disappeared. But the crows, the battle goddess, the Morrigan, were not there, for he had broken his 2 geisa. So they came into the battlefield, the battle of Miterne. And there, on the horizon, from far as you could see left to right, with flapping banners, were the troops of Queen Maeve of Connacht. And here he was, alone, save for Louis, the king of charioteers, and the Grey of Macha, the king of horses. And Maeve was sitting there on her horse. Oh, Cuchulainn, Cuchulainn, deny thy name, and I shall give you freedom. And Cuchulainn screamed, no! And grabbing one of the gay boga, and pierced the skull of one of the bards. Erk of Leinster, whose father Cuchulainn had killed, yanked it out and killed the Grey of Macha. And the scream of the horse split mountains and boulders, and all the horses in the land screamed and bowed at the death of their sovereign. Cuchulainn, Cuchulainn, deny thy king, and I shall let you live. Cuchulainn in his battle fury, grabbing another gaboga, and pierced the skull of another of the bards. Louis Couloir, whose father Cuchulainn had killed, yanked that gaboga out and pierced the body of Louis, the king of charioteers. 2 kings had died already. Maeve snickered. Cuchulainn, Cuchulainn, deny thy country, and I shall let you live. Never! Grabbing the last gay boga, threw it and pierced the skull, and 5 other members standing behind a druid. And there one of her champions pulled it out and threw it back and pierced Cuchulainn in his stomach. Everything froze. What was going to happen now? Cuchulainn, with his strength, reached and pulled the gay bulk, pulling his intestines and his guts, and taking his left arm with what strength he came and pushed them back in, and wrapping the reins of the chariot around him to keep them in. He stepped out of the chariot and went over, hobbling, to a nearby stream, and reached down and took a handful of water. And with all the remaining strength that he had, he wrapped that reins around a standing stone. And he stood up, and he raised his sword above his head. And he died, standing up, surrounded by his enemies. Tagalak Nagalak, ageri sa spe. Sagrihanan o maratamutawe. Tanabehogedrandan, sunshine dwillerdon. Haguibara, nagacha, guibara, nadon. And that's the story.
Thank you so much for that, David. That was incredible. That was a brilliant story to listen to. And I would once again like to invite people in the comments to share what lessons they drew from the story. And whilst they are typing away in the chat, we actually have, before we come on to my question, a question from Tim, who said that he absolutely loved the story and wondered what makes this your favorite story to read.
I think it's because I can really get into it. If you follow me, I can let the story tell itself. And it's a powerful story. If you know the entire Ulaid, which is 7 stories, and if you do the entire 7 stories, it takes about 2 hours. If you follow the life cycle of a hero. And this is, if I may, this is a story that people have said is my signature story. So, that's how it works for me.
Brilliant. I also have a question for you, if you don't mind. So you've been a storyteller in so many career settings, working from everyone from teenagers to those facing end of life. Is there any particular age group or situation which you think benefits the most from storytelling and traditional stories?
Well, in today's education society, because I'm speaking from education right now, it seems as though the people that the students that I have more resonance with are secondary and university because of the intensity of my stories. Oh, I can tell for young ones, but my stories are usually, way up here. Excuse me, way up here. And they can enjoy them. But it's like so much can be lost. So much can be lost. So that's why I get the more mature students, the adults. And I have actually told that story in hospice because people are so afraid of death. And I tell them, don't be afraid of death. You've done what you can. And you die with dignity, surrounded by your enemies, whatever they are. So that's the age group and the settings in which I really enjoy telling. And I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting, as you said, that storytelling can mean different things to different age groups, and it is really interesting. Especially this story being said in hospices and end of life is quite telling, really.
Well, what if I may interrupt you for a second,
Go
Jake?
for it.
One thing that has stuck with me is what, of all people, Vladimir Lenin himself has said, children have storytellers, adults need them. And also, another writer is like fantasy dances where reality walks. So, anyway.
Yeah, that saying there was brilliant. And I do think if people can take something from today, in particular, I definitely think remind yourself of that. And that kind of shows why storytelling is so important in the modern world today. And we do have some more comments for you. So Adam said that your commitment is next level. And we don't have your name, but GamerBot22 said that was amazing. And lastly, we had Purple Monkey, who in brackets is your biggest #1 fan, said that the hero stands for what is right, even in the face of death. Do you think that's something that people can take from this story?
I believe so. Not necessarily in face of just death, but in face of trials and tribulations and problems. Be able to stand up and say, all right, I recognize what you are. What the hell are you going to do now?
Yeah.
Try me.
Definitely. So I think that's it for the comments. So what we'll do is thank you so much. Oh, what I will say before is if you would like to see more of David and see more of his fantastic work, all of his contact information is below your screen right now. So all of his different sites, YouTube channel, etc. So if you're really interested in more of his stories, do check that out. I'll mention that at the end as well. So yeah, thank you so much for your time, David. That was really great.
Thank you.
We'll be moving on to our final performer now. So we would like to issue a quick content warning. So the following story does have some graphic elements that may not be suitable for younger listeners. So just be mindful. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ali. So Ali has been an amateur storyteller and poet for many years now and has performed at various Scottish and music and literary festivals, such as Burns Night and Keelid. I could have pronounced that wrong. Ali, just do let me know if I have. He has also recently started a YouTube channel and a podcast called Never Lost, where he shares the old Scots folk tales, retelling them in his own words for new audiences. So thank you very much, Ali, for joining us. Is Ali there?
Ali cannot start his video.
Oh, we've got a video.
The host has stopped it.
Ah.
Oh, it's on.
There we go. Hello, Ali. Lovely to have you.
It's fantastic to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Do say, did I pronounce that right?
Keelys.
Yeah. Keelys. It wasn't far off then.
You were very close.
Yeah, there we go. I'll take that. So we've got a quick question for you before you start your performance today. So in preparation for this event, you highlighted that many moral lessons and stories from 200 or 300 years ago are often still very relevant today. Can you elaborate more on your thoughts about this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll try to answer it fairly quickly. On the basic level, the morals of almost any story are still relevant. For the Three Little Pigs, which teach us perseverance, to stories like Robert Bruce and the Spider, which teach us trying and trying and trying again. But on a deeper level, the morals of a story tell us what the people were thinking and what they valued when that story was conceived and written down. So they can be very important from a historical point of view like that as well.
Yeah, that's a brilliant answer. I think that was a really interesting comment I took from yours, actually. And I do think particularly with a lot of things going on in life in general, it is really important to look back on old tales and stories and just reflect on them, really. So with that, the floor is now yours, and we'd love to see your performance. So away you go.
I'll be telling an old Scots folktale called The Twa Sisters, or The Bone Heart. It's a fabulous tale from the 16th century, and there are many versions, but I'll be doing the Ayrshire version tonight.
Thank you. That sounds great.
A lang, lang time ago, when there were fairies and brownies and kelpies and selkies, and magic still lived in the forests and moors of Scotland's bens and glens, there was once a king in the fair county of Ayrshire who had a castle on the top of the rocky cliffs of the western shores. The king was a good man, and he ruled the surrounding land with a kind hand. Many people actually believe that the king was the master of Dunure Castle, the ruins of which still stand today, about 5 miles south of the town of Ayr, and they're well worth a visit if anybody listening is ever in that area of the west coast of Scotland. The king was a well-liked man by his subjects, and his subjects were all very pleased when their liege lord and his good queen gave birth to a lovely, dark-haired and dark-eyed baby girl, who they named Helen. The royal couple were blessed again 2 years later by the birth of another baby girl. Their second child, who they named Kyla, had golden hair and blue eyes. The two princesses were the closest of sisters growing up. Dark-haired Helen loved her younger sister Kyla, and often the two young girls would go to the rocks by the sea and sit and listen to the waves as they lapped slowly closer with the rising tide. Sometimes Kyla even rested her head in her older sister's lap, and Helen would sing to her, stroking her golden hair while seabirds called overhead. As the years passed and the girls grew, differences in their characters became apparent. Helen became a quite lovely, black-haired young woman with dark green eyes like the deepest ocean. She was confident and commanding, fearless and proud. Kyla, in contrast, was the gentlest and kindest soul that anyone could ever meet. She had her father's empathy and generosity of spirit and was loved by all who knew her. Also, although Helen was quite lovely, Kyla, with her long golden hair like corn in summer and eyes the colour of cloudless skies, was stunningly beautiful. But this never caused quarrel between the sisters, for Kyla was quiet and humble, always telling Helen how pretty her older sister was. Brushing her hair in their bed chambers, Kyla would say how much she wished her hair was dark and how well it complemented Helen's dark green eyes. As the two princesses continued to grow into young women, Kyla continued to be the delight of all who knew her. Her kindness and her generosity blossomed, along with her beauty. She was often seen in the castle's walled gardens, helping the gardeners tend the flower beds. Dark-haired Helen could never understand why her younger sister did such things. In stark contrast to fair Kyla, Helen grew more distant and aloof as the years passed. Her confidence developed into vanity, and her pride changed into a sense of superiority. One day, a brave and handsome young knight called at the king's castle. The knight presented himself to the king and asked permission to court the older princess, Helen. After all, the king, while blessed with two lovely daughters, had no son or male heir, so whoever married his oldest daughter would inherit the king's castle and his lands upon his passing. The king was impressed with the knight and very pleased at the prospect of a match between Helen and the brave young man. He gave the knight his blessing, and the knight wasted little time and began immediately to shower dark-haired Helen with gifts of beautiful silks and gold jewellery. Helen was right pleased with these expensive gifts that she felt befit her station, and she became very fond of the young knight. However, as the knight was staying at Dunur Castle, it wasn't long before he was introduced to fair Kyla. He was quite taken with the younger princess, whose golden hair flowed in waves past her shoulders, and whose eyes were the stunning blue of cloudless skies. It could be that the knight fell immediately a little bit in love with fair Kyla, or it could be that over time, as he got to know both young women, he simply grew to much prefer the company of the younger princess, who was warm and generous where Helen was cold, and kind where Helen was prideful and vain. However it happened, it was soon clear for all to see that the young knight spent more and more time with fair Kyla and less time with her dark-haired sister, Helen. Indeed, as the months passed, the servants of the castle certainly noticed it, and they often spoke of what a good match Kyla and the knight would make, and what a shame it was that Kyla had not been born first. Helen, too, was well aware of the change in the knight's behaviour as time passed. She was also probably well aware of the servants' gossip, even though none would dare speak such things in her presence. Helen was hurt and angry at what she saw as her sister's attempt at stealing the man who was rightfully hers. But fair Kyla wanted nothing more than for her dear sister to be happy, and she did all in her power to redirect the knight's affections. Helen, though, knew nothing of her sister's efforts on her behalf, and she became jealous of Kyla's fair beauty and of the apparent effect that her generous nature had on the young knight. The more time the knight spent with Kyla, the more Helen grew to resent her younger sister. Seeing the knight's face light up at the sight of fair Kyla was a bitter pill to swallow for prideful, dark-haired Helen. She belittled her sister's kindness, calling it foolishness, and she began to criticise her sister and put her down at every opportunity. When her knightly suitor was not to be found, and Helen knew he was somewhere spending time with her sister, she would withdraw into her bedchamber and seethe in dark, green-eyed envy. It was from the window of that very bedchamber that Helen witnessed what was to be, to her sight, the final betrayal of her sister. Kyla was in the gardens, tending a flower bed, when the young knight approached her. They had a conversation that seemed, from a distance, to be intimate, and finished with an embrace that was held to Helen's jealous green eyes for entirely too long. Helen was furious. How could her sister do this to her? Kyla was clearly encouraging the affections of the young knight, who she knew was virtually betrothed to her older sister. Consumed by her jealousy and anger, Helen conceived a cruel resolution to the situation of her traitorous younger sister. Had Helen actually heard the conversation between her sister and the knight, she might have felt and acted quite differently. For the truth of the encounter was quite different to the awful scenario that Helen had envisaged. The young knight had indeed approached Kyla in the garden and had indeed professed his affection for the fair-haired princess. However, in answer, Kyla had told the knight that while she cared for him deeply, there was no amount of affection in the world which could lead her to hurt her sister. She knew full well that Helen had fallen for the knight, and she could never come between Helen and her happiness. Kyla impressed upon the knight that while she could and did care for him as a brother, it was Helen who would love him as his queen. The truth, though, mattered little now. Helen's misplaced jealousy and anger had set her feet upon a path from which there was no turning. The next morning, Helen went to her sister in the garden. She told Kyla that she was saddened and sorry that they had drifted apart over the past few years, and especially since the coming of the young knight. Helen suggested that the two sisters take a long walk together along the beach and the rocks at the shoreline, as they had done so many times when they were children. Gladdened by the thought that Helen wished to repair her relationship with Kyla, the younger sister agreed without hesitation, and the two young women set off in the early afternoon as the tide began to turn. As they walked, Helen and Kyla talked as they used to, and Helen seemed closer to the caring older sister that Kyla knew as a young girl. When the two women reached a stretch of familiar rocks, Helen said, "Dearest sister, remember when I used to sing to you on those rocks? We would listen to the sound of the waves and the seabirds for hours. Let us rest a while, as we once did, and reclaim the sisterhood that has seemed recently lost." Kyla was happy to oblige her sister. After all, she was tired from the long walk, and she was feeling closer to Helen now than she had for many months. So Helen knelt on the rocks, and Kyla rested her head on her older sister's knee, while Helen stroked her long, golden hair. Dark-haired Helen stroked Kyla's hair slowly and with the same rhythm of the waves. Helen saw her sister's eyes slowly begin to close, as they had so often when they were children, and she began to sing. She stroked and sang in time with the waves, slow and steady. The song she sang was a sweet, simple lullaby, and Helen never stopped stroking her sister's golden hair as she softly sang. "Rest, little sister, with your head on my knee. Listen to the sound of the soft, calm sea. With each lapping wave, let your tired eyes close. Listen to the sound as your breathing slows. I'll be here with you, by your side, so listen to the sound of the rolling tide." Before long, golden-haired Kyla was fast asleep. Helen continued singing as the rising tide lapped closer and closer, but now she began to gently tangle and tie Kyla's golden hair to the kelp and seaweed which was anchored to the rocks around them, twisting and tangling Kyla's golden locks and tying her sister to the seashore's rocks. By the time the rising tide began to lap at Kyla's feet, waking the young princess from her sleep, she was fixed tight to the rocks and unable to so much as raise her head, so tightly was she tied to the seaweed. From farther up the rocky shore, Helen watched her sister struggle in vain to get free from the kelp and seaweed before the waves began to cover her body and head. But her efforts were useless, and before long the rising tide covered fair Kyla, and as Helen watched, she said under her breath, "Let the sea's rising waves overpower you. Let the currents and tides take and devour you." Kyla's body was most certainly drowned and washed to sea by the waves. However, many people in the county of Ayrshire believe that at the very last moment Kyla's spirit was rescued by the Selkies and taken to their home in the land under waves. Selkies are mystical creatures in Scotland who can take the form of men and women or seals at will. And Helen had seen 2 seals bobbing in the water offshore while she was carrying out her foul deed. However, whether her spirit was taken by the Selkies or not, Helen had certainly murdered her fair younger sister. Everyone in Dunure Castle was devastated when Helen returned and told them that Kyla had slipped on the rocks and been swept out to sea. The king and queen had boats sent out to search for her, but there was no sign of the young princess. However, even in the face of unbearable grief and sadness, life in Dunure Castle went on, and before long, Helen and the young knight were engaged to be married, and the king and queen and the castle's servants were able to forget their sorrows as they prepared for a royal wedding. You might think that Helen would be pleased, but seeing the grief she had caused her mother and father made Helen realise the enormity of what she'd done. Helen was haunted by guilt and tormented by memories of her happy childhood with her sister. In the mirror of her bedchamber, she saw the image of Kyla when they were young as she brushed Helen's hair and told her how pretty her green eyes were. I said before that the boats sent out by the king and queen found no sign of Princess Kyla. However, on a sandy beach many miles from Dunure Castle, Kyla's lifeless body washed up on the shoreline, and it was found by a famous bard who was struck by the stunning beauty of the princess whose body he had stumbled across. The bard had never seen anyone who looked as pure or as pretty as Kyla. He remembered being told of a fair princess with golden hair who sang as sweetly as any songbird. The bard buried Kyla not far from the shore, but not before he had used the bones of the poor princess to fashion a clarsach, the likes of which had never been seen before. A clarsach is a Celtic lever harp, and the bard used Kyla's breastbone to make the crown at the top of the harp, and her finger bones to make the levers. Finally, he strung the instrument with the princess's golden hair, and the sound which echoed from the harp was as sweet as any songbird. Meanwhile, at Dunure Castle, the preparations for the wedding were complete, and the day had nearly arrived. The guests were invited, the castle was decorated, and the feast was being prepared. The king had even invited a famous bard to play at the wedding, a bard who, it was said, had a harp which sounded sweeter than any other in all of Scotland. On the morning of the wedding, the guests were seated in rows in the castle garden, and everything was ready. The only thing that the ceremony was waiting on was the arrival of the famous bard, who got there in the nick of time as the groom stood waiting at the altar. The bride, Helen, was ready to come down the aisle as soon as the bard began to play. He unpacked his incredible harp as he got ready. However, as soon as the harp touched the ground within the castle, it began to play all by itself, and even more shockingly, it also began to sing. To Helen's dismay, the song that the bone harp sang was a ballad, telling the full story of everything she had done to her sister. Helen was powerless to stop the song, and soon everyone attending the wedding knew what she had done and kept hidden. The king and queen, with their heads in their hands, wept as they hadn't wept since the day Kyla had been lost. The young knight who was stood at the altar turned and walked away, hiding his face with his sleeve, and the guests looked on in shocked horror as the harp finished its sad and terrible song. Helen ran down the aisle and fled the castle in disgust at herself and guilt at her terrible deed. She didn't stop or even slow down until she reached the high cliffs above the sea. And when she did reach the cliffs, she barely slowed down even then. As tears streaming from her eyes, she flung herself off the top of the cliffs and out towards the rolling sea below. Some believe that Helen drowned in the sea like the sister she herself had murdered. But it is also said that some of the guests followed Helen when she fled, and they saw her leap from the cliffs. These guests swear that the black-haired princess never hit the water. Instead, they claim that as she fell, her body changed into that of a great black cormorant and disappeared across the tops of the waves. All cormorants today are said to be descended from the transformed princess, and each time any of these birds dives beneath the sea, they look down in case they catch a glimpse of the spirit of Kyla, which Helen hoped had indeed been rescued by the Selkies and was living somewhere in the land beneath the waves. And that's the end of that story.
That was a terrific story, Ali. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today. So what we'll do is, if you all could all share your thoughts, feelings, any questions at all, any lessons you think you've learned from that story, that would be really much appreciated. And while you are all typing away, Ali, I've got a question for you. So you previously stated in preparation for this event that you believe that traditional stories and folktales are an integral part of Scottish history. Please, could you share your thoughts and elaborate more about this?
Yeah, of course I could. I think they absolutely are. In fact, they're not just an integral part of Scottish history, they're an integral part of Scottish culture, even today. In Scotland, the act of telling stories and telling poems and music are all closely intertwined at events like Céilís and Burns Nights and festivals. And a lot of the stories that we tell come from very old, ancient Scots ballads. And a lot of the stories are covered today by Scots folk bands.
Mm.
The story I just told is covered by quite a few. One band, Old Blind Dogs, do a lovely version of it. And the famous poet Sir Walter Scott in the early 19th century also does a fantastic poem narrative version of that story.
Brilliant. We do also have some great comments for you as well. That was a great answer, by the way, Ali. That was really interesting outlook, I found. I think it's really interesting as well, as you said, how stories and folktales can also transition into bands and, you know, musicians even performing it in song as well. First of all, I'd say that we've had some great positive comments about the fantastic waistcoat you're wearing at the moment.
Thank you. Crocheted by my lovely wife.
Oh, brilliant. It looks amazing. So first of all, Tim, who you might have noticed asked a question about David, why he picked the story. He's asked you the same thing. So he just wondered why you picked this specific story today.
I picked this story because it's one of my favourites, because it was one of the first stories that I heard in a community storytelling setting. In Scotland, a lot of our music festivals have storytelling tents. And I was at a Scottish folk festival, which is still going on today, actually, called Knochengorach in Dumfries and Galloway. And this was the first story that I ever heard in a story tent at a music festival. And it was one of the reasons that I got into storytelling.
Brilliant. Thank you for that answer. Actually, marvelous. Maybe I think you've answered this before, because they said that they knew this story before and thought that they might have heard it sung. So I'm guessing they might have done that.
They absolutely will have heard it sung. It's actually a very, not common, but it's a very widespread story. There are versions of the story in England, Ireland, and across Scandinavia as well. And there's a good number of different versions. But I find the Ayrshire one is my favourite because it's the first one that I heard. And it's also the darkest.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. We had a few comments about some feelings and thoughts people had throughout the story. So Purple Monkey did say that, and this is what I definitely took from this story, is that jealousy and envy can definitely turn one's heart dark. And I think that's one of the, you might correct me, but I think this is one of the things we can definitely take from this story.
No, absolutely. That is one of the overriding themes, I think, throughout that story. And the idea of karma, that you can't escape the evil things you've done.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. We even had David, one of our fantastic speakers today, who said he's very familiar with the singing harp motive. I mean, I personally hadn't heard it before, but I'm guessing, is this the original story that sort of idea came from?
Yes, exactly.
Brilliant. Yeah. So yeah, we're coming to the end of the comments now, but we had so Jen said that was a very tragic but beautiful story. And it is, and she mentioned that it's a cautionary tale about jealousy and misunderstandings that have to be guarded against. Do you think that's something that's interesting?
Yeah, I do.
Definitely. Yeah. And yeah, Safi Darling, there's a lot of comments. This has obviously been a very successful story. So Safi Darling said there's something a bit different. So she said that she loves that you can link places and real life to mythical creatures to the stories.
Yeah, that's the other thing I love about Scots and Irish folktales. They're very often tied to actual places that you can go and visit and see the kind of place that inspired the story, which I think is wonderful.
Yeah, definitely. And then finally, we have Adam, who said that these tales speak to the feelings typical of a human experience, and more interestingly, things to be learned from the villain as much as the hero.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You get that a lot in Scottish folktales as well. I just covered on the podcast and YouTube channel the story of Byra the Winter Queen. And she's a fabulous three-dimensional antagonist. You can understand why she's doing what she's doing. She's not just a sort of archetypal villain, just evil for the sake of being evil. And I love that about the old stories.
Yeah, yeah. What we'll do is we'll thank you very much for your thoughts on those comments and the brilliant story. So what we'll do now is, before we move on to the next section, thank you so much to Ali, as I've already said. And if you'd like to hear more and see more from him, all of his contact details, his material, his content, is all the details of that are in the description below. So please make sure you check that out and give him a follow, because all of that goes to all of our storytellers as well. So make sure you give them a follow, see what they've got going on as well. So we've got just a little bit left. So what we thought is we'd go to the floor for some questions just for our storytellers. It can be about the stories. It can be about anything else. It can be about why, storytelling as a background, that kind of thing. So while you're all typing, I have got one to start with. What we can do is, while you're here, Ali, we'll go backwards from the running order, so we can start with you first. So what we'll do is, could you tell us what made you want to become a storyteller?
For me, it started very young. I got a huge appreciation for Scots folktales from my parents when they told me. And this was only enhanced because we were very into the Scottish folk music scene. My sister actually is a fantastic clarsach player herself. So I got all the old Scots folktales from songs and from my parents. And then when I started seeing them being told, for example, at music festivals and at Céilís, it made me want to do it myself, especially at music festivals when I saw the younger generation being engaged with it. I thought that was amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for that, Ali. If we go on to David now, could you enlighten us on how you became a storyteller and sort of your path to where you are now?
Yes, certainly. My undergraduate major at the university here in the States was in theater and dramatic arts. And as most likely, well, at least here in the US, acting and stage jobs are very, very few and far between. It's one of the most uncertain professions. So I went into theater education and taught in the secondary school. That's where I started. And we did one unit entirely on improvisation and one-person shows and things like that. And I started doing the storytelling with my students, and it just sort of stuck. And when I moved into the university setting, I was able to use my storytelling to enhance and enrich uh, classes in history and literature. I had a very interesting experience of doing storytelling with mathematics majors, in which we went into the whole thing of doing stories about Pythagoras and the Pythagoreans and the Pythagorean theories, and the professor really loved it. So it just started. This is not like, oh, I'm going to do this. It just sort of like I just sort of slid into it. And since then, I've been doing it for over 50 years, as you've said. And I've expanded out into hospice care. And I do storytelling with the dying homeless, which is very, very powerful experience. So, but I keep up everything else. And my passion, as I said in the introduction, are the truly ancient epics and the ancient sagas, because they basically are sitting on some scholar's bookshelf, gathering dust when at one time they were in the public consciousness. So it's sort of like my uh, duty, if you will, to bring them back. So that's what happens with me, and I keep doing it.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting from hearing about Awe, Ali, and yourself, all the different paths that you've taken with storytelling. So, it's brilliant to hear Ali really taking an interest in the Scottish folk tales, and I think we took that from the story as well. And I think as we said earlier, the sort of using stories in everyday life. I mean, you mentioned about speaking to homeless. I mean, that's a fantastic opportunity that storytelling can get you. So thank you so much, David, for sharing that.
Welcome.
And lastly, but certainly not least, Awe, can you just tell us sort of an insight on how you got into storytelling as well, please?
Hello.
Hello.
Can you see me?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks both to David and Ali for your fantastic stories. I really enjoyed them. I got into it, my background was in drama as well. And I did do some storytelling as part of a sort of different stages of voice training and acting training, but it wasn't really until after I had finished my studies and I was living out in Southeast Asia, and that's when I started to be introduced to teaching drama and storytelling in the educational setting, because I was in an international school and the teachers kept saying to me, we want to teach a unit about Africa because there's nobody else, in the school in Thailand or in the school in Hong Kong who, has your background. Can you come and work with our kids and give them a little bit of that kind of cultural diversity? And it was through that experience that I was able to start doing storytelling with schools. And what I love about it is how you can adapt stories to all different age groups, and as everyone else has said, to different audiences, and how you can always pick out different nuances and focus on different messages or different themes. And I also love the adaptability of stories. The fact that storytelling as an art form is something that has always embraced the ability of stories and of the creation itself to change. So each storyteller adds their own little flavors and focuses on different things. And sometimes the stories morph, but they always, carry the same essence. But in that way, they're able to really travel across borders, across cultural divides. And I think that's what I love, and that's what's made me want to continue in this way and do more storytelling.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. It's really interesting to hear about how all three of you have got into storytelling, and how you obviously are very, really experienced storytellers now. It's sort of linked into what you were saying, Awe, but if you could adapt on that, and then we'll go back to the others as well. I think what's really interesting that we've taken from sort of studying storytelling prior to this event is, so how do you think we can sort of keep traditional events sort of relevant in sort of the growing digital world?
You mean live events specifically?
Well, just like, storytelling and folk tales, because obviously we know how important they are And sometimes with, social media and the digital world, we're sort of moving into a place that might take so storytelling for granted per se. So how do you think we can sort of keep storytelling relevant and exciting, as it is now?
I think it's just about going back to the true intention behind it. As far as my understanding, storytelling certainly in a lot of the African contexts that I'm interested in was about preserving history, was about a number of things, but preserving history was a major one, and also giving people a sense of belonging. And I think in an age of social media and in an age of sort of fast entertainment and things, we can scroll through a lot of stuff, but we don't necessarily connect with memes or with the media that we're bombarded with a lot of the time. It just kind of glazes over us. And the joy about storytelling is it kind of brings us to that moment where we stop and we focus on whether it's a particular emotion or a particular theme or a particular sort of characteristics that the heroes in our stories have. And I think just appreciating the fact that the storytelling allows us to have that pause in a busy world, and introducing that to lots of people is a really special thing. And for me, specifically, African storytelling, a lot of the traditions have a lot of interaction. We interact with audiences, which is, difficult to do in different mediums. But often in Southern Africa, for instance, stories always start with call and response. So the storyteller says something and then expects the audience to say something. In Shona, we say sarungano, sarungano, and the audience says zefunde. And that begins the story. And it's a way of saying, I'm not going to tell you the story unless you tell me that you're ready to listen to the story. And the minute we do that, then we're really engaging the audience and making sure that the audience is actually also part of creating the story. And later on in the story, there might be a song, there might be a chant or something that we teach the audience and get them up on their feet and get them singing and dancing. So there are different ways in which we can draw people in and make those experiences memorable on multidimensional ways, through different senses, in a way that I think sometimes social media and a lot of the media that we have today doesn't necessarily hit all those buttons at the same time, and stories do.
Yeah, that was a really, really good answer to that question. So thank you so much for that. David, is there anything you think you need to add to what Awe said in regards to this sort of topic?
No, mercy, mercy, mercy. Yes, I agree with, being able to cross over cultures and things like this. The U.S. is a nation of immigrants. Oh, there's that word, immigrants. And the thing is, so many of them have become so assimilated. They seem to have, meaning those immigrant nations, seem to have forgotten their traditions. And I know I am a second generation American. My mother's side is from Russia, and my father's side is from Northern Ireland. So I feel like, okay, here we go. And then being in Texas, where I am, oh, mercy, you want to talk about multicultural. And I've been learning a lot of the stories there. But one thing I've been really interested in is adapting a story into the local setting, if you follow what I'm saying here. I have taken several of the Norse tales and set them in West Texas, which is basically what Hollywood says Texas is. And I tell it like this in the whole accent and the dialect and the whole bit, and the people love it because we have a great Scandinavian ancestry here in Texas. Then going into my background, I grew up in the East, and there's a lot of Appalachian stories that were influenced by the Scots and the Irish and the intermarriage with the native peoples, like the Jack Tales. And it keeps the attention going. It keeps the tradition going, no matter how you adapt it. One thing that I have found, going back to what Awi was talking about, we're so used to now to the 10-second soundbite. And storytelling stops that. And it allows the person to have focus and attention. And that's one of the one of my feelings about how storytelling is very, very positive. But we have to remember that storytelling is the original social media.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, it's the original social media. And we are the memory, storytellers are the memory of the people. That's really all I have to say.
That was a brilliant answer, David. I think there's some really, really good points in there. I think the last line you said there really struck home of that the storytelling is the original social media. I mean, we look at, YouTube and things like TikTok now. I mean, that storytelling is the essence of that. It's the core. And I think that's a really, really, really good quote from that. And finally, Ali, is there anything that in regards to this question, that you think you need to add?
I think Away and David covered most of it. For me, the important thing would be engaging young people as much as possible. Like I said, there's quite a lot of young adult and adult storytelling in Scotland at music festivals and Burns celebrations, Céilís, traditional Hogmanay celebrations will often have storytelling. Winter and summer solstice celebrations will have storytelling. But every time I've seen storytelling at family-friendly festivals, the kids are so engaged. It's incredible. So I'd just love to get that to as many other places as possible. Every single school fet in Scotland should have a storytelling tent.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's I think I noticed that as well. There's various festivals I've been to over the years. And the storytelling and sort of cultural tents are always so interesting to go to. And I think that does show, as you said, why storytelling is just so positive. What we'll do is thank you so much for your questions, and thank you so much for answering them so well. We're going to conclude the Myths That Shape here. So what we want to do is we want to thank everyone for coming. So first of all, the three brilliant performers. So Awe, Ali, and David, thank you so much for taking your time to come and speak. You've been an absolute pleasure to listen to today. Thank you to also, obviously, the audience members for attending this with all your brilliant questions. You've made this such a brilliant event, and it's been so engaging. And so we really, really appreciate that. And we really hope you take something from this, whether it be how important storytelling is, some of the fantastic works we've had. Even, if you want to look up some more storytelling from even where your culture, where you're from, etc. Just really hope you take something from that. We asked at the start about some locations where you're watching. So we even have some people from Finland, New Zealand, all across the US, and also all across the UK. So this has actually been an international event, which is brilliant to say. So thank you for that. We do have a survey that will be emailed to you all that will appear in your inbox, just about your thoughts and feelings for this event. So we really appreciate if you take the time to fill it out. It's not too long, so it will only take you 5-6 minutes. So if you can fill that out, that would be fantastic. And I suppose that's it. So thank you so much for coming to the Myths That Shape. This has been fantastic, and we hopefully will hear back from you all soon. So thank you very much.